Today I'm here to talk about the horror and thriller books I've been recently reading. Almost all of these books are new releases, and I have some great books to talk about as well as some duds and several books in between as always. And one of the books, the first one I'm going to talk about, I'll be honest, I loved it. But I happen to know that a lot of my audience is going to hate it. I'm going to get angry comments, and it's just going to happen because I will always tell you what I like. I will always be honest with you, but this one's going to get a little controversial, so warning ahead, let's get started. So let's just rip the band-aid off and start with the book that is going to get all of you so mad at me, but yes, I did love Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by McLeod Chapman, and this is a book that is set in what appears to be a modern version of the United States. However, it is not directly calling upon our current personal figures, but instead it is set in this world where we have this young man who has had a falling out with his parents. They have become very much entranced by a lot of the news that they are receiving from this particular agency, and the son sees this news agency as having conspiracy theories and sharing misinformation, and has gotten into some really heated arguments with his parents. Again, it's really strained their relationship. They don't talk a lot. However, something happens. His mom ends up leaving him a voicemail, and that voicemail makes him really concerned that things are going quite wrong. He goes to visit them, and the story goes on from there. This is one that is a clear nod to current events, and particularly making a lot of conversations around a particular American news agency that has really polarizing opinions on it. You either love it or hate it. Now, as I think everyone knows by this point who watches my channel, I am Canadian, so just know that I'm coming in with the bias of someone who has political leanings that are outside of the framework of the United States, and I'm looking in from afar, but certainly given current events, I do have strong emotional opinions, and I do feel like I have a bit more of a stake in it suddenly than I thought I did before. So anyway, this book for me came at the right time. I was feeling very riled up, very much attacked for my own country's sovereignty and all of these things, and this book was so on the nose that it felt very cathartic. It felt like that emotional release that I needed. In a lot of ways, I felt like I was going crazy. I'm not seeing a lot of my fellow booktubers and reviewers and the people that I follow, especially in the States, talking out loud about what's going on anymore. And it feels like everything's gotten very quiet, and everyone is just trying to get through the next couple years if they don't agree with the current establishment and move on and just kind of keep quiet. And this book is pretty much the opposite of this. It's so on the nose, it so pushes boundaries, and I can only imagine the feedback that this author is getting, because traditionally he writes very classic horror stories and thrillers that are facing conversations around occults and different things that are much more open to cross appeal, that specifically aren't political in their nature. And so this for me is a huge departure from this author's previous work, which I have liked, but admittedly not necessarily loved in the way that I haven't really connected with them the same way. This one hit home. It just felt so powerful. It had some strange humorous moments as it really almost makes fun or satirizes the whole situation and really tries to poke holes in everything, and just doing all of this. I can't exactly say it's doing it in the most nuanced way, because certainly, again, it's doing it very on the nose, but it was kind of the on the nose experience that I needed when I was reading the book. Now, I recognize that some of you watching this video are probably thinking, that sounds fantastic. I think a lot of you would love it too, but I recognize that I also have audience members who kind of look the other way when I share certain opinions at best or leave angry comments at worst, and I recognize that not everyone is going to get along with this book. I will leave it to you to decide if it is worth your time. It's definitely speaking to a particular set of individuals. I don't think that this author is trying to win over, say, the other political side, but rather have a story that is written for the audience that it was clearly targeted towards. I will say that that audience targeting worked to make this a really emotional appeal to myself. But again, it's going to make a lot of people angry, and a lot of people are going to be angry at me for saying that I like this book, but I do, and I don't feel like I need to apologize for that. I enjoyed it. I get you were all gonna leave hate in the comments. I'm gonna get unsubscribes. There's a reason my channel probably isn't growing these days, and I think it has a lot to do with me being a little bit more public about what I think about certain things. And oh my goodness, I am just gonna go ahead with this video because I thought it was a really powerful take, and you might disagree. As long as we can keep polite, I will listen and read your comments. Just please keep it nice. Please not so much name calling this time around. Thank you. Next up, we have Senseless by Ronald Malfi, which is one of my personal favorite horror authors in general. I always say that, then I find he writes the kind of stories that are just very digestible, easy to read, not necessarily 5-star reads for me, but typically they end up being 4 stars. That being said, if I'm honest, this one was 3 stars. It is a multi-POV story where one is this individual who finds this dead body in Los Angeles, and you follow different perspectives in the LA region, and they slowly tie together. It's one that just didn't really have much of a strong message or theme. I really didn't know what the author was trying to say with this book, and if you can't tell from the last book, I like an author with an opinion. You guys are going to argue that I like an author who has my opinions, and you're not entirely wrong. Certainly we all, I think, have our biases that do draw into what we prefer to read, but really with this one, I just found it to be a weaker story. I didn't find the characters to be the most complex or compelling. I didn't really care about them, and often when it comes to horror, more than the true scariness factor, having characters that I care about is one of the most important things. I've seen this author do characters that I really cared about deeply in other books like December Park. This one just fell flat. I am seeing this author put out a lot of books very quickly, and I do wonder if that volume is really affecting the quality of his works, where I'd love him to slow down and really find something that inspires him with this next book, because it just feels like he's kind of going through the motions of putting out book after book without having a particularly strong point of view with any of them lately. So I'm kind of losing a little bit of excitement with this author. I'm hoping the next one will redeem it for me. Next up, we have White Line Fever by Casey Jones, and this one follows a student who is going on a road trip with their friends through Oregon. Something goes terribly wrong and the story goes on from there. This, I will be honest, is a very surface level travel horror story. I have loved some road tripping horror stories in the past, but this one felt like it's just ticking the most basic boxes of the tropes without diving deeper. Again, the characters I found to be very generic and very unmemorable. The plot itself, again, without caring about the characters, again, I found to be very flat and simple, and it's not one that I love, so very disappointing. I'm always looking for a new vacation book, something that is perfect to read if you're going on a trip, if you're someone who's lucky enough to be able to read a physical book in a car. I wish I was that person. I get horribly car sick, so audiobooks are my only saving grace if I'm driving in the car as a passenger, but even with that, I just don't recommend this one. I think there are stronger road trip horror books out there. Next up is This Book Will Bury Me by Ashley Winstead, and this is one that sounded right up my alley. You have this young woman who is grieving the loss of their father. In order to escape that grief, they end up getting obsessed with true crime, and with that they find out about these mysterious murders that have happened at the local college, and they get swept into there. I am someone who typically is very fascinated by fiction books that are meant to kind of feel like a true crime sleuth, where you have an amateur detective like her who is piecing things together, figuring it all out. It has the appeal of true crime without the guilt that comes with finding any pleasure through someone else's actual pain, grief, and loss, which is the problem with real true crime. And so on the surface, this one sounded fantastic. Unfortunately, you can already tell how I'm talking about this one. It fell really flat for me. I just had a bad string of horror books. Partially why I didn't film and put together this video until now is I don't like to put a video together until I have some strong recommendations in it, and I kind of read one dud after another, if I'm honest. This one, again, the character was really flat. The story, where on paper it sounded really fascinating, I just couldn't get invested in the mystery or what happened. And it just didn't do a good job for me of bringing this to life, where I wanted to feel like I'm reading a nonfiction true crime account. And this one just felt like really weak fiction, where again, it just felt like an incredibly surface level take on something that could have been oh so good. And sometimes with a book like this, because the book had so much potential, it almost makes it a even less satisfying experience to go through it, because you know that this book could have been amazing, and the unsatisfactory experience you get just leaves you wanting more because you know it could have been so good. And then I want to talk about We Solve Murders by Richard Osman, and this is my first time reading this author, but definitely won't be the last. This is one of my strongest recommendations in this entire video, and thankfully one that has no political and angle, so it is safe for everyone to enjoy regardless of where you're coming from. This one follows a duo. We have a supposedly retired detective who gets pulled out of retirement by their daughter-in-law who has taken over the business, and when a dead body shows up, naturally they are called into action. This is one that probably sounds like a really generic mystery from my basic synopsis, but there's something so special about it. You have these really interesting, quirky characters that have their own little personalities that make them feel like real people rather than stereotypes. I love their back and forth. I love the interaction with the characters around them. And the mystery itself was quite compelling. I also like the fact that this one feels incredibly modern, which might be a turn off or a turn on for some readers depending on what you like. But this one actually deals with the concept of a lot of AI technology. They're referencing GP chat, and it just feels like the technology of our day is very much present within the story and they're not ignoring it. Often there's these books that are ambiguously set in today's time, but then there is very little use of technology, and instead this one does quite the opposite, so it really explores that, but again, it doesn't take away from that human piece, because in my mind, I read this one first for the characters, their banter, the back and forth. Had so much fun with this one. We'll definitely be reading through this author's backlist, which I think they have a fair amount of, so watch for those reviews because it will definitely be coming. I had so much fun, and I definitely am glad that I finally took the time to check out this author. I believe this book came out last year, and it's a shame I didn't get to it until now. And finally, we have God of the Woods by Liz Moore, and this is a character-driven, slow-burning mystery story where it's set at the beginning in the 1970s, where there is this young girl who has gone missing from camp. And what is unique about this is that they are not the first family member to go missing, and the camp immediately is very much on alert, afraid, trying to figure out what happened to this young child, and the story progresses from there. This is one that I would best recommend to those of you that love, again, that slow burning mystery where it's more about the characters. It's one where you have to appreciate the writing, the setting, all of that. You really get a feel for the era, and it takes its sweet time. I will say that this book was really enjoyable to read because I was in the right space for it. If I was in the mood for something a lot more fast-paced, if I needed more of an escapist read, I would encourage you to look for another book, only because this one, while it is engrossing, it's almost as engrossing as you make it out to be. It's as enjoyable as you want it to be if you just love spending time appreciating a nicely crafted sentence, a really interesting portrait of a character. But again, I will argue, at least from my perspective, that the mystery itself was perhaps the least compelling part. I loved everything else, the layers of the story around it. I definitely want to check out more by this author because I just found them to be a really good writer, a really good craft of story, and again, everything constructing the story in terms of the narrative and characters was fantastic. It's one that I wanted to read last year, and I did try to, but it's been on hold since, I believe, about September when you all told me to read this book, and it finally came through now. It's a challenge when I do a lot of my reviews to the library. A lot of people criticize me for getting books from the publisher, but if I don't get them through the publisher, it means that I'm waiting often months to get my review out, which means that I'm not always doing it in a really timely manner. So if you were like me and didn't read this one last year and you love a good, well-written, robust mystery story that you can sink your teeth into and take your time with, I do recommend it. I feel like this one received a lot of hype within that particular bubble of mystery authors, but if you were outside of those reviewers and missed out on this one, I do recommend it if you're the right audience, because again, I think that this one is a little bit niche depending on where you're coming from. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself, and you can even let me know what books are you planning on skipping, because again, I recognize that that first book in this video is probably not going to be for everyone. I do respect that some people, even if they perhaps share some of the author's opinions, will find that book to be too topical, and I know a lot of you left comments on previous videos saying that you're reading for escapism right now. But for me, again, I process the world by reading about it, and certainly sometimes I read to affirm biases, and I do really try to push myself to read from other perspectives to make sure that I'm not getting too jaded, too much in my own bubble. It's a balance. I don't always do it perfectly, but if I'm honest, I do like to just let you know what I'm reading, let you know what I'm enjoying, because really I'm a reader first, and I pretend to be a reviewer, at least put on that hat so I can sit on camera here. But again, I appreciate all of you who stick around, subscribe, and put up with me even when I'm being a little bit of a loudmouth. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you think I deserved it. And of course, if you choose to stick around, I hopefully will see you soon. Talk to you then. Okay, bye-bye.